President Obama has announced a new executive action concerning gun sales in the U.S. The issue of guns is a highly controversial one. We're exploring some of the reasons why. First up, in the debates over gun rights and gun control, the Second Amendment to the Constitution often comes up. It says, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed."
I believe in the Second Amendment. It's there written on the paper. It guarantees a right to bear arms. But I also believe that we can find ways to reduce gun violence consistent with the Second Amendment.
One part of the president's plan would make a new rule for individuals who are, quote, "in the business of selling firearms." It's not exactly clear who that applies to. But what they'd have to do is register as licensed gun dealers. That would force them to make background checks of people who bought guns from them. Until now, many person-to-person gun sales could be made without these background checks. But can the president enact this rule without Congress's approval? He says yes through executive action. But House Speaker Paul Ryan, a Republican, says no, that the president's proposal to restrict gun rights were debated by the U.S. Senate and rejected. Ryan says no president should be able to reverse legislative failure by executive action, even slightly. Critics of the president's proposal say it wouldn't have stopped last month's terrorist attacks in San Bernardino, California, or the 2012 shooting at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut. The president, emotional when mentioning victims of that attack, said while his action wouldn't stop every act of violence or evil in the world, it could try to stop one act of evil, one act of violence. Where do Americans stand? A Quinnipiac University poll in December found that 89% support increased background checks for gun buyers. But a CNN ORC poll in December found that 51% of Americans are against more gun control laws.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. The truth about guns in America. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. President Obama is taking his cause to the public that there should be tighter restrictions on who is allowed to buy firearms in America. Today, he said this.
And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
Mr. Obama is obviously sincere in his quest for more public safety, but he is missing the big picture. According to the latest FBI stats, slightly more than 8,000 people were victims of firearm murders in 2014. There were 118,000 robberies involving a firearm and almost 150,000 aggravated assaults involving guns. The population of the USA is approaching 330 million, so you can see there is not a gun crime epidemic. And the vast majority of these heinous crimes are committed by hardcore criminals, not civilian shooters. Right now, there are more than 300 million firearms in America, and they're currently all over the place. So there will be a thriving black market for guns no matter what kind of registration laws are passed. As far as terrorist-related firearm killings in the USA, there have been 88 deaths in the past 10 years by armed terrorists. Not an epidemic. Now, Talking Points understands public safety, and reasonable gun registration laws should be on the books. But perspective is very important, and restricting law-abiding Americans from acquiring guns is obviously unconstitutional. Again, the gun violence problem primarily lies with hardcore criminals. So where is the federal law that mandates strict prison time for anyone using a gun in the commission of a crime? Where is that law, Mr. President? You mentioned Chicago. That law could do something about gun violence in Chicago. You simply can't leave sentencing to local judges if you want to control gun violence on a national level. You can't do it. Talking Points had said it before. Any person convicted of a gun-related crime should get 10 years in prison on top of what they get for the crime, whether it's assault, murder, or robbery. That would send a meaningful message. The truth is, terrorists are not going to submit themselves to background checks. Neither are dangerous felons or insane people. They're not going to sign any paper when they buy a gun. Do we all get that? They will buy their guns on the black market. And no registration law will prevent that. On the other side, the NRA and the gun owners should be reasonable. The FBI should background check anyone buying a firearm in America. That just makes sense. If you are paranoid and believe the government is stockpiling information so they can come to your house and take your guns, that's your problem. Your problem. But the government has an obligation to enhance public safety. And that brings us back to harshly punishing people who violate the law with guns. Registration is not going to solve the gun murder problem. Zero tolerance toward gun crime might. Think about it, Mr. President. That's a memo. Now for the top story tonight reaction. Joining us from Palm Beach, Florida, Democratic strategist Nomiki Combs. And from Washington, David Goodfriend, a Georgetown law professor who worked for the Clinton administration. Where am I going wrong, Professor?
Well, Bill, I want to start on a positive note and thank you for saying that background checks make sense. And I think that has become unnecessarily politicized, that issue. So let's start there. They do work. There is evidence based on states' experiences that when background checks are increased, gun deaths go down. When they are decreased, gun deaths go up. That's a given. But I do think,
can you give me one state, though? Can you back that up with state stats? Go.
Yes. State of Missouri, according to the Johns Hopkins University research, when their background checks were reversed 40% increase in violent crime. Connecticut, when their background checks were increased 33% decrease in violent crime.
But we don't know yet about Connecticut because it's too early to tell. But
well, I'm talking about between 1996 and 2005. That's a pretty big sample size.
I can counter with Chicago and the Illinois gun laws, which are very stringent. Now, very hard to buy a gun in that state, and very hard to buy a gun in Chicago. Yet gun violence is off the chart in the precincts of South Chicago and the ghettos because they're gun criminals who aren't buying guns through gun dealers. So
right. So this does, if I may, Bill, this does bring up an issue. How much of a decrease is enough for it to matter? And quite frankly, you're a man of faith like me. I turn to the Bible on this one. There's a story in Genesis of Abraham arguing with God before God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, hey, God, would you do it if 50 righteous people died? What about 10 righteous people? And he's saying, in essence, to God, sometimes withholding that violent act just in the name of a few innocents is enough. I think it's a very important lesson out of the Bible for us right now.
Maybe so, but I'm interested in real solutions to real problems. Nomiki, how do you see it?
You know, I have to agree with both of you here. I commend you, Bill, as well for calling for sensible gun laws. The problem here is that Congress has been blind to the gun epidemic and the violence, whether Chicago or in the South or the mass shootings or the fact that we're in the 5th day of the year and there's already been over 120 gun-related deaths due to gun violence. You know, Congress hasn't been answering because they're owned by the gun manufacturers who are pumping out $300 million a year to lobbying, though. That's a lot of money.
There are many Congress people in your own party who don't want to restrict law-abiding people from acquiring firearms, all right, because it's unconstitutional. That's the genesis.
And no one's saying
not some big money operation. But look, gun registration, you both must understand, is not going to stop, all right, Charleston, where the kid was given a gun by his father, okay, San Bernardino, where the terrorists were given guns by some nut who got them legally. All right? It's not going to stop it. And to perpetuate this myth, Professor, that a gun registration, and President Obama's in tears pleading for it, is going to make things better, it isn't. All right?
How many
there
innocent
are always
lives?
going to be these kinds of things.
Bill, how many innocent lives are enough? So in this case, suicides are a great example. 2/3 of deaths by handguns are from suicides, and that brings us right into
suicides
the mental
is a
health
whole
debate.
different question. Look,
well, it's a mental health debate, and I think that in that case,
mental health.
And I want more mental health. And part of the president's presentation, which was lost in the politic, is that we have to have more stringent mental health reporting, and I'm for that.
Right.
But you guys have to understand that law-abiding people registering their guns is not going to stop Charleston or Connecticut or terrorism. Those guns are going to be the only thing that will stop it.
But it will stop the majority of them, though.
No, it won't.
We have one
Nomiki,
mass shooting.
you're living in a world of your own. With 300 million guns on the street, Nomiki, you can get a gun. Just walk into the wrong neighborhood, flash some cash, and you'll get it.
Bill, can I just
last word,
because some
Professor.
states have looser gun laws. When you look at Chicago,
Nomiki,
when you look at Chicago, that's coming in from states that have looser gun laws. They're smuggling them in. So this plan is about cracking down on those individuals.
You're not going to get the black market division. No matter what I say, you're not going to accept it. Well, Professor, 10 seconds, go.
Okay. Black market sales without registration. In 1994, legislators in Connecticut said this wouldn't work, and it did. It actually did curtail black market sales.
Connecticut, but remember, Connecticut is a very rural state with only 2 urban areas, Hartford and New Haven. Guys, I appreciate the lively debate. Thank you. Next on.
So what do you make of it?
Well, some of what the president did is well within his authority. Can he hire more FBI agents? Yes. Can he dedicate more discretionary funds to mental health issues? Yes. Can he broaden the database of information that is accessed when doing background checks? Yes. But the most significant thing he has attempted to do, or will attempt to do when he signs an executive order later today, is to create a new crime by saying that if you sell as few as 2 guns or transfer as a gift as few as 2 guns, you are a dealer, and you therefore need a federal license. And if you transfer the guns as a gift without a federal license, you can be prosecuted. Why is that troublesome?
Right.
Because Congress 3 times rejected that proposal. So he is attempting to rewrite laws. Look, if he doesn't like the gun laws, he can argue to people, get your representatives to change them, but he can't change them on his own.
Okay, let's look at the number of criminal weapon convictions over the years, because he talked today about federal law, but there are laws that are already on the books that apparently are not being used, because when you look back in time, look at this. In the fiscal year 2015, there were 6,002 criminal weapons convictions, but they're down 5.8% from last year. They're down 15.5% from 5 years ago. They're down 34.8% from 10 years ago. And then in an anomaly, they're up a whole bunch from 20 years ago.
Okay, one of the things that he also promised to do today was to enforce federal gun laws. Gretchen, that is not newsworthy. It should not be newsworthy. His job has been to enforce federal gun laws since January 20th, 2009.
Right. Why would people be against dealers reporting lost or stolen firearms?
I don't know that people are against it, but it is very important the way laws are written in this country. They can only be written by the Congress. They cannot be written by the president. Many people may favor his proposals. He claims that the polls show that even gun owners favor his proposals. And I'm not in a position to dispute that, but of course you can find polls to support anything. But under our system, his job is not to take a poll and then decide what laws he's going to write. His job is to enforce the laws that Congress has written.
But every president does executive orders, executive actions, hundreds of them.
Yes.
So what will stop him? Will the courts stop him with it?
If he attempts to prosecute someone, if his Justice Department attempts to prosecute someone who failed to register as a dealer because they gave a gun to their nephew, that person and that person's lawyer will challenge the prosecution, and presumably this regulation that he came up with on his own will be invalidated by the courts.
Real quickly, the next president in office can wipe this out.
Absolutely. The next president, he or she could ignore it or could rescind it.
All right. Judge, thank you much.
You're welcome, Greg.